They said the Crow Ranch was older than the town itself, older than the roads, older even than Mercy, and at its center stood Silas Crow, 70 years carved deep into his face like the cracks in drought-split earth, a man who had bent land, cattle and people, to his will for so long that most believed the ranch breathed only because he allowed it to. And yet on the morning the giant bride arrived, Silas stood alone on the porch of the main house with a weight in his chest heavier than any saddle he had ever lifted. Because power could conquer many things, but it could not outpace time. And time had finally turned its gaze toward him. The ranch stretched endlessly before him, fences vanishing into the haze, cattle moving like dark rivers across the plains. Everything he had built with iron resolve and unyielding command. Yet there was one thing it lacked, one absence that gnawed at him in the quiet hours when no one was there to fear him. There was no heir, no child to carry the Crow name, no blood to inherit the land that had consumed his life. And in a world where men were remembered only by what they left behind, Silas Crow refused to vanish without a legacy. The town had whispered for months before the wedding, voices hushed in church pews and sharpened in saloons, because the woman Silas chose was not young and delicate as tradition demanded, but towering, broad-shouldered, and impossible to ignore, a woman the town never knew how to name without cruelty. And when Elara first appeared at the edge of the ranch in a dust-worn wagon, the air itself seemed to recoil, because she did not arrive timid or apologetic. She arrived upright, eyes forward, carrying the silent defiance of someone who had survived being stared at her entire life. She had learned early that the world had rules for women like her, rules designed to make them smaller, quieter, grateful for scraps of acceptance. But Elara had never fit those rules, and so she carried herself like someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere at once, a giant not in arrogance but in presence. And when she stepped onto Crow land, boots sinking into soil that answered only to Silas Crow, the ranch hands froze, unsure whether to look away or stare, because nothing about this union made sense except the one truth. Everyone feared to say aloud that Silas Crow was desperate. The house swallowed Elara in silence as she crossed its threshold. Walls lined with trophies of dominance and survival, animal heads staring down like judges, oil lamps casting long shadows that made the old man's figure seem both formidable and fragile at once. And when Silas finally faced her fully, cane tapping against the floor, his eyes did not soften or wander. They measured, weighed, calculated, because this was not a meeting of romance but of necessity, and the words that passed between them were few and sharp, an agreement spoken without tenderness, built on survival and expectation. And as days turned into nights, the ranch seemed to tense around them, every meal eaten under the weight of what remained unspoken, every shared space a reminder that this marriage was forged not by affection but by demand. Silas ruled the ranch as he always had, with discipline so absolute it bordered on law, expecting obedience as naturally as breath. Yet Elara did not shrink into the role the world had written for her, and instead of remaining hidden within the house, she walked the land, learned the cattle routes, watched the hands work, lifted what others struggled to move, earning wary respect from men who had never taken instruction from a woman, much less one who stood taller than many of them. And each day she refused to disappear quietly into the background. Something inside Silas shifted, not into warmth but into urgency, because time was accelerating, his body betraying him in ways pride could no longer conceal. And one night, beneath flickering lamplight and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the plains, Silas finally spoke the truth he had carried like a blade in his chest, laying bare the purpose of their union with ruthless clarity, making it known that the Crow legacy would not end with him, not after everything it had consumed. And Elara, standing unmoved yet shaken by the weight of his expectation, realized in that moment that she had not married into a household, but into a war between a man terrified of being forgotten and a woman who refused to be reduced to a single purpose. And as the storm broke outside, rain hammering the roof like a warning, The Crow Ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would bend first, because the future of the land, the name, and every soul bound to it now rested on a choice that would change everything. And if you want to know what happens next, how power begins to shift inside the Crow household, and why Elara's presence threatens to rewrite the fate of the ranch itself, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this story is only beginning, and what follows will challenge everything you think you know about control, legacy, and strength.